All right, everybody, welcome to this week's live stream on whole farm planning. Joining me today is Jeff Dickinson from Stratford Ecological Center. We are going to farm planning. So this is definitely one of those really broad topics that can be difficult to talk about, but we're going to try to break that down for you within the next hour with a lot of experience from Jeff here and some of my initial impressions of farm planning. I know just talking to people getting into agriculture, one of their biggest questions is, what do I do with my land once I get it? It can be really hard to conceptualize kind of that plan and those goals to just set those and move forward because it can be really overwhelming right there at the beginning. So we are going to go ahead and continue on with this week's live stream. So thank you guys for tuning in this week since it was rescheduled from last week. We wanted to say that it's kind of like the number one rule of farm planning is to be flexible. So we had haying going on last week, which is why we had to reschedule because it's important to get that done. If you are tuning in today, make sure that you are also aware that on Thursday we are going to have another live stream on renewable energy. And that one is going to be kind of a full overview of all of the renewable energy that we have going on at Stratford. And then we only have a couple more sessions left this summer. We have biochar coming up next week. We have introduction to haying the following week. And then we have our wrap-up session. So if you've been tuning in all summer, thank you for tuning in. We are really appreciative of it. And I am going to go ahead and jump to our schedule of, kind of the rest of the week, the summer, so that kind of like what we're going to be going over a little bit more. And then we will jump into our presentation. Jeff, did you want to say anything before we get started?
I wanted to thank you for helping us make hay last week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was hot enough, and I'm glad it wasn't this week we were making hay. So,
oh yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of a broad topic. So get ready for some broad concepts. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Here we go. I entitled this presentation "An Agroecological Farmer's Approach." Agroecology. It's an interesting blending of agriculture and ecology to sustainable whole farm planning. It's a big topic, as we mentioned earlier, and it's one that's not easy to condense into 45 minutes. And there's been a lot of thought about it. So let's take a shot at it and sort of see if we can find some themes and some concepts that we can work with as we move forward. So, all right, let's say you just acquired a piece of land, and that's Stratford, you see behind that question. So, lucky you. I feel lucky for you. I've never owned that much land myself. So you want to farm. You want to make a living at it. And you feel like you have a responsibility towards that land. So what do you do next? So whole farm planning has been a concept that's been around for a while, much longer than me. And if you read the literature and all the varieties of ways that it's been presented, it basically is a four-step process that I can buy into because it makes sense. It's a very dynamic model. It can be used by the farm family to balance the quality of life, which is important as we move forward to develop these plans, and the desire to use the farm resources, and to sort of think about production and profitability. But let's not forget that long-term stewardship is an important part of that. So there have been a variety of tools put together, so let's just look at a couple. Holistic resource management is an interesting concept, but I need to qualify up front that HRM, or Holistic Resource Management, which is a concept developed by Alan Savory, and the Holistic Management Institute actually is an organization that still exists. It's a process more than a planning tool, but it speaks to a very important part of the planning process, which is the need to always test your decisions, monitor the results, and then reevaluate and then sort of rethink what you're doing on a daily basis. So the holistic management practices, it says very explicitly up front, define what it is you're managing. And from my perspective, you're managing your entire property, because the entire property has not only income potential, but potential to maintain an ecological system that has a high level of integrity. Make your intentions. This goes beyond farm planning. It goes beyond business plans. It's setting your intentions, setting your goals, being very specific about what it is you want to achieve. And that's a theme that you should sort of see as a life goal. Aim for healthy soil. I mean, bottom line, what we've talked about so far here is that healthy soil is a very important component, if not the most important component, of any farming system. Consider all the tools, options. I mean, we have a problem in our current agricultural mindset that we have to use this tool for this practice, and there's only one way to do it, and we need to sort of get beyond that mindset that our own resourcefulness, our own ingenuity is something that we need to push. Again, test your decisions. Don't consider yourself to have made a good final decision. First of all, no decisions are final. You're always going to move from them to the next step or the next direction or to the next enterprise. But always test, and then the orphan in this whole process is the monitoring process. Farmers are not by nature good marketing people, and they're not good record keepers. We don't get into this business to do sort of what I call administrivia of the day-to-day. And monitoring requires some administrivia. Marketing requires a lot of administrivia. So it's an interesting collection of ideas. So why bother to practice holistic management, whole farming planning? You know, it's the whole idea that we can work in harmony with nature. That nature actually has all the tools and the resources we need to actually produce a crop, and to raise livestock and a variety of things that we can actually develop profits, have production that benefits the family and the community on a whole, and guess what? It improves the habitat of wildlife and the whole ecosystem also. So holistic resource management, it's more about process, less about planning, but it is rooted in nurturing and reclaiming the land resource. And I say reclaiming because Alan Savory is actually a very highly debated figure. At TED Talks, he has one of the most classic TED Talks out there about how you can use animals to basically reclaim deserts. Arizona used to be a large agricultural state until we sort of desertified a lot of its resource through the way it was farmed. And what Alan Savory has proven all over the world is that we can use the action of animals, not just domestic, but wild animals, the hoof action, careful implementation of seeds, manures, and other nutrients, and how we manage that grazing pattern across that land to actually regenerate that land. There's a large school of people who just think that's total baloney. I personally, as a livestock manager, think there's a lot of value in that, but it can also be a tool to destroy land if it's not managed and monitored. Again, test, monitor the process on a regular basis. Another sort of perspective that I find very intriguing, but I've yet to see very successfully or broadly done in North America. It's more of a subtropical, almost arid type region where these concepts, and that's Bill Mollison and the permaculture ideas that have been around for some time now. What's interesting about Bill Mollison is he had a very intuitive sense about how climate, topography, solar aspect, relationship to vegetation and the mineral, sort of more physical components within a farming system impact the overall farming system. So if you're going to design a whole farm plan that's connected that intimately to the ecology and the climate, you have to sort of think about how you move through those areas. So one of the most unique points was around the idea of the homestead. Now, I think a lot of this work was done in Tasmania. It's the idea that, you know, where you have these sort of wildfires that come across these sort of grasslands, dry grass lands that are very seasonal. You have the potential of being caught in the middle of a prairie or grassland fire. And so the homestead was built to sort of limit that type of tinder near the home and the activities, and it was a very wild area, very many predators, sort of things that want to come get you and your livestock and your crops. So the things that are most valuable to you, you sort of kept close to your home. That was the zone 1. The zone 2 sort of becomes an extension of that with sort of some practices or methods that are put in place to sort of protect the homestead. So very useful in thinking about it, and in terms of how we scratch the surface of the land too is very interesting. P.A. Yost, who was sort of a collaborator with Bill Mollison, came up with the idea of using keyline plowing, which is a slightly off contour. A key line is sort of like the ridge on the back of a mountain or a hill, where all the like a continental divide, where the watersheds begin to part ways and go different directions as it's coming off the slope. So you recognize what those ridges and where the water's parting direction, and instead of letting it fall down the slope as fast as it normally would through just raw physics, you plow slightly off contour and force that water to move across the landscape and slowly percolate into the soil and into the groundwater, conserving water, which also helps to build organic matter. And I'll talk more about how important organic matter is in the whole farm planning process. So here's going to be sort of one of my take-home messages for the day, is that we could break it down again into 4 basic steps: setting goals, assessing resources and the preferences that you have chosen within that resource list you get to work with, assembling and implementing a farm plan, whole farm plan, which is no small task by itself. Keep in mind, Rome was not built in a day. And monitoring and revisiting the whole farm plan, testing the decisions, collecting the data, come out the other end with a sure sense that what you're doing continues to make work from an ecological, economic, and sustainability point of view, and also how it relates to the community. So that cyclic process. So again, reiteration, the mantra: setting goals, inventory assessment, developing and implementing an action plan, and monitoring on-farm progress towards those goals. It's a process that never ends. The decision-making process never ends. And as we all know in today's world, the environment which we live and work with changes on a regular basis. We have to, as a species, learn to become more nimble and adaptive to whatever nature or humanity or politics or whatever is throwing at us. We got to make it work, one way or another. All right, so let's take the first step, setting goals. I would like to first suggest that there is no set perspective to what constitutes a goal. Goals can run anything from financial to emotions. You know, quite literally. I'm not making fun of that idea. You know, some of us get into farming and we're sort of independently self-sufficient, and farming is a way to actually create therapy and sanctuary for us. But a lot of us, most of us, get into it for that and the ability to actually sustain ourselves and our families beyond that. When you start deciding or setting your intentions, I like to say, that's sort of a more universal concept. When you start getting into that process, it requires the utmost honesty with yourself and with the others you're sort of forming the plan with. Ideally, plans happen within a family setting or a couple setting. Farming is not something I would, unless you're a hermit, that I would suggest doing all by yourself, but I can see the merits in that. So total honesty is important up front. And again, like I mentioned, goals can be financial, physical, intellectual. You're just on a quest. And it's actually a very difficult process. Most people, when you start off with, well, you need to make a plan, and you turn around and say, well, what are your goals? Most of us are like deer in headlights. We have no sense of what our goals are. We're sort of, as a species, very out of touch with our goals. And we need to start thinking about it. You have to put it on paper. It's a tough decision-making process. And keep in mind that goals are never set in concrete. These are things that can evolve and change. And again, invite families or people within the community to help you make and set these goals. All right, variety of goals again. The quality of life issues. What it is you want for your family, the vision for the future for the farm and the family, how these enterprises provide the income and living environment. Home and social resources, environmental, natural resources, economic, financial resources. These are all things that need to be considered as a whole in terms of what you want to enhance, utilize, sustain, work with as you move forward and develop your goals. And let's not forget that goal setting can also have just pure altruism, you know, doing good for the greater society and the greater planet. It's not necessarily about profit, but the idea that we can actually pay forward a piece of land that you, as the current farmer, took care of and passed on to future generations is a very lofty goal. Okay, quality of life. Yeah, these are all straightforward. The opportunities to try a new set of skills, that's farming. You know, I've been doing this for 40, 50 years almost, and there's not a day goes by that I don't learn a new skill or learn an old skill, because a lot of the skills we learn in this process are things we do once a year. So you got to rethink it as you go through that year. Farming also creates a lot of opportunity to create more time for you and your family. I totally get the agrarian lifestyle. When you have a family involved in a variety of enterprises, or you give an enterprise to a child or to a niece or a nephew, it's a great way to maintain family community. And if we could sort of extend that to the greater community, to me that sounds like quality of life. It's the kind of thing I would like to pursue. So they are a very strong driving force in the goal setting process, and you're not going to avoid them as you move through it. Again, keep in mind, it's not all about money, it's not about profitability. But you can't look at these goals or set these goals and sort of pursue them as, through rose-colored glasses. You got to be realistic about it. So I just threw this in here briefly just to mention that when you involve families in the goal-setting process, that the goals actually quite often extend more into what looks like corporate America, where we have a business plan, we have retirement plans, we have, let's see, what was that? A transition plan, okay, or succession. Again, if you're going to be a landowner, one of the primary questions you should have in your mind that when I've done this for 40, 50 years, am I going to just sell out and turn into development? or are you going to actually transition it to another person who wants to maintain it as land, as productive land, as green land, for future generations to appreciate and cherish? So that's a very important concept to consider as we move forward in these whole farm planning processes. And then this is sort of me, is because it reflects more about the mission of Stratford. Goals can also be something as broad and hard to get your head around as this one. We want to affect climate change, mitigate its effects, and make it more successful yet sustainable. There's a win-win opportunity here that we can actually take advantage of as the climate continues to push us in ways we don't like to go. Renewable energy, which we'll talk about here Thursday, is an incredible opportunity. And I don't understand why people are dragging their feet on it, because it's an opportunity to not only get us out of the problem we're creating, but to create profitable enterprises and ways to approach managing and working the farm into the future. So, along with that goal, I have goals for our farm. Grass-based agriculture. To me, that's the number one tool I have in my process, in my tool bag, for soil regeneration and for raising livestock. Time and time again, people who raise livestock strictly on grain, in a very volatile grain market, commodities market is just no way to live, just like the stock market. You know, it's a luxury when everything else is balanced out, but it's no way to live. Agroforestry, a very untapped, unappreciated source that we need to take advantage of more, not just take advantage of and exploit, but take advantage of in terms of expanding and cultivating and nurturing. In a time like this year where we're in record rain again, and we spend half of the year underwater. We live on a very heavy clay soil at the Stratford Ecological Center. I literally can say 30% of the time I look out across the landscape in areas that I used to crop are now underwater. And here we are this week, feast or famine, it's just so dry. The air is even dry, except the last couple of days the humidity's just gone nuts. So again, we're trying to adapt. So why not, if we got all this water, why don't we start catching more, which goes to helping us build groundwater, which creates opportunities for maybe agritourism, or you bring the community into fish, to raise fish to be harvested, or you rent fish to finish clean up us, or how about just the beauty of a pond and the idea that you actually have water, some on your land where the rest of the land is parched. More perennial crop. Permaculture has its roots in that. Holistic resource management has it. Biodynamics has it. Perennialism, or West Jackson, we've talked about, new roots in agriculture. The idea of using a prairie, a perennial crops, and some annuals mixed in there too, that we actually can harvest our food supply from. No-till production. I'm pushing towards that, unfortunately, right now. That means herbicide use for most farmers. For me, it means spending a lot of money for tools that we as a nonprofit don't personally have and would like to get someday. Long-term crop rotation. Stratford's rotation is an 8-year crop rotation. Shifting input cost through vertical integration and value adding. Actually sort of get multiple use, add those input costs to actually get greater value out the other end. So, great concept. And then the community. We can never move forward without considering the community and the market and the situation that we live within and develop those long-term relationships. All right, let's go to the next step. Inventory and assessment of all on and off-farm resources. To me, this is probably one of the more important steps, because a lot of our mistakes we make on managing and setting up plans for our land-based resources is that we don't fully appreciate or understand how they operate and function as an ecosystem, what the history is, what the land use pattern has been over time. So that includes, in my mind, all natural, physical. I'm talking about the physical components of rocks and soil, the terrain, the topography, everything that the human resource. Do you live in a 500 person town, or do you live in a city of 10 million people? So that obviously affects things. Capital availability. Do you have it? Do you need to raise it? Do you have to bootstrap this in? Family resources, intellectual resources, and so forth. I like to emphasize the importance of history. Geological history is there in front of us for the learning. The U.S. Geological Survey, Ohio survey maps, geological survey, soil survey maps, they're all available for free at our disposal. And you pick up a Delaware County Ohio Geological Survey or soil survey map of Delaware County, and you could literally spend the rest of your life just picking through it and learning new things about your soil on a regular basis. And I'll show you in a minute how much our soil history is patch dynamics, because every piece that's exposed is in relationship to history and time, and the glaciers and the erosion, land use patterns. It's little pieces of time sticking out or buried, throughout a piece of land. So that history is very important, because that exposes the soil that you're going to farm on or graze on. That's going to respond very differently depending on what you do with it. So I'm a big fan of getting to know the geological and soil history, but also the community, family history, land use patterns, what was farmed there before. Forest. Most of the forests you see around us here in central Ohio were completely logged out 100 years ago. So what we see are less than 100-year-old forests, but they look magnificent to us now. But keep in mind, there was a time and a mindset in this country where forests were clear-cut from coast to coast. And we went through this large boom, and then we went through this large collapse in economics. And so our understanding of the relationships with people and the people who own and manage other resources that you want to utilize, that's important. And again, you can't draw heavily enough from maps from my book. Soil testing, past to present, you really can't get beyond that. And baseline soil measurements. This is a concept. Every time I throw it, people just get this aha moment, because parts of Ohio are actually under prairie. Most of Ohio is under forest land. Of course, we just talked about how that's been removed. But nature's always trying to recover and regenerate itself. And it's always getting closer to its original state by leaving it alone. Now, when we throw in invasives and things like that, that sort of tilts things a little bit. It certainly changes the soil nutritional levels. It impacts largely on the species that are evolving there, and every species has its own ecosystem that it creates and works within. So the way to get a sense of where we were and where we would like to get back is to actually start soil testing in areas that are undisturbed, in old fence rows, the edge of a forest, even within the forest. But if you're going to do multiple samples, go ahead and put on that sample that this is in the forest, this is the edge of the forest, because there is a transition in soil quality that happens when we sort of move from field to the inner parts of the forest. And collecting that kind of data gives you a sense of where you want to move in terms of organic matter building, how much you've lost nutrient-wise. Calcium's a major driver. So get to know your land in any way you can, reading the books, get a sense of the historical and the present sort of status of what's going on. So yeah, assessment includes everything under the sun, including the kitchen sink. So, all right, the beauty of a good soil survey map. I tell you what, this one shot, this smaller version of Stratford's map. We can see the south neighborhoods on Bunty Station and the north neighborhoods in Stratford Woods, who named their subdivision after our preserve, which is the group of trees you see on the left-hand side. You can see those dark shaded areas on the treed area on the left-hand side of that map. And you can see where the vernal pools are, where the swamps are, which is part of the designation which made all of that forested land fall under state nature preserve requirements and made it desirable to make it so. So on this map, I can pick out soil types. You see the three little lettered symbols across here. We got Bennington soils and Pewamo soils, and there's 4 other types of soils on Stratford. That's the first letters. The second 2 letters give you a sense of slope and the sense of the soil, the texture quality of the soil that you're farming. Whether it's a loam or it's a silt, or clay, or topsoil, or sand, which we don't have enough of, I'll say, for this part. Topography, the yellow lines are topography on this, the physical land features and the surrounding properties, and then the beauty of a map. If you get a nice clean map to work with like this, it gives you the opportunity to actually have the palette or the erased chalkboard in front of you that you can actually start drawing lines on. Does this make sense? Well, the slope's too steep if I come across this way, or the water's here and I want to farm over here. It sort of physically puts the planning that you want to get through and the process you want to do in front of you. Again, when you make those goals, you got to put it on paper. It's not the kind of thing you can leave in your head and expect to make much progress. So yeah, this is just a bigger version of that. And when you look at the bigger version, you can actually see all the waterways. And when I show you the next map, which I won't get to quite yet, but you'll start to see, if you look at those waterways, the way they look across the fields, you can sort of see the divisions of the fields. Our fields are typically about 5 acres. You can see the lines that suggest that the fields run north and south. I actually maintain about 9 fields that work within our 8-year crop rotation. But you'll notice over time, I have farmed this land myself. I've been associated with 30 years, but I lived and farmed it myself since 2003. We used to run rotations on those 5-acre plots. But because of the way the water runs, I've learned that the north half of that field reacts very differently to the south half. So my rotation is actually much more complex now. Those waterways are driving that in terms of how the soil reacts to the crops I put in. So I actually have an 8-year crop rotation on about 18, 19, 2 to 3 acre parcels, dividing every 5-acre field in half as part of my work. And it's not, we used to have a set schedule of what was planted in that field that year. I've gotten away from that. I am responding to what the weather, how the cropping season went, how much the cattle and the other livestock are using the land, or how much I'm able to save it and secure it, how much sod I can produce, how much water is moving across, how much rain we got, how mild the winter was. I am not making that decision to where to put that crop rotation into that very specific year. I'm walking that very specific piece of land and saying, all right, I need to start over here, or I need to take advantage of this and graze this hard this year. Those decisions can't be made until you have the context in which you've experienced what's going on in all those little small sub-parcels. Nature and ecosystems work on a very small patch dynamic. They don't do the same thing over large expanses of land unless the land is totally flat or you're within a very stable ecosystem like the prairies. Or you're in an island. An island changes, it's a whole different type of ecosystem. So we have to be able to react to land on a patch dynamic basis and make timely decisions. So the desire and need to be remembered are very important. There's a little more of a management-oriented map that makes it easy for me to, after I've sort of walked the land, I can actually go through and start dividing those large brown pastures. Sometimes I'll divide them north-south, sometimes I'll divide them east-west. And then those subdivisions actually then become part of my paddock system for my intensive grazing management system. So I have to be thinking about, well, I want to be able to move sheep from the far southeast corner up to the far northwest corner. And can I do so without or going through a crop I just planted, or a field that's totally destroyed, or in mud or underwater or something like that? So I had to be thinking logistically, and also ecologically. So I'm actually redesigning the farm on an annual basis. I'm setting new goals on an annual basis. And the resources that are around me that I take advantage of are the green spaces you see on this map. Biodiversity, as we talked about earlier in our talks, is a driving force. The biodiversity helps maintain the insects, the micro and macro arthropods, the bird population, the reptiles, the amphibians, that all contribute to the health of the ecosystem and the water that runs through it. And the yellow areas are the areas that we've used for more intensive horticultural uses, and those within those spaces themselves, they also change. So it's an interesting and fun map to work with, and the beauty of maps is you can always redraw. So we're getting ready to go into the next step, and that's the implementation. And I just want to stay up front that every landowner has a responsibility to every square foot of the land. And it's perfectly legit to make the goal that I'm going to leave that piece of land alone. I'm going to do nothing. That goes with the once for all revolution, Masanobu Fukuoka. You know, that his greatest tool was a big stick. It did nothing more than scored the soil to drop the seed into. And he did plant a bunch of an orange orchard, but once he planted them, he just walked away. He says, you either make it or you don't. You know? So that's a perfectly legit goal. You can go that way. But to keep in mind that even that act requires some accountability and responsibility from the landowner to the land. So this is where the rubber meets the road. Not that the stuff we've talked about isn't important. The last step's just as important. But I'm just going to give you some highlights about how to approach your enterprise development scheme and how you can utilize the resources that are on the property instead of importing and exporting resources to make your system work. So we talked about how soils and nutrient management is sort of key to all this. All my experience, all my work, research, reading, talking to farmers. Farmers are in essence organic matter managers. Organic matter drives the whole system. It's the organic matter that houses the life of the soil. It's the organic matter that moves the nutrient soil through the soil. It's the organic matter that moves the air and the water through the soil. It's the organic matter that gives tilth to the soil. Creates the ability for us to till the full soil. It's the organic matter that can be totally squashed and made dead through drought that will spring back to life with the slightest hint of moisture or life being reintroduced to it. So we are in essence organic matter managers. So think about it, we're a grass-based farm. We're surrounded by, 160 acres of forest. There is a wealth of organic matter on that property that we can use as supplements as mulch, supplements to the soil directly, as nutrient making through compost making. We wouldn't have, with every ounce of organic matter that's on that property, we should never have to use an herbicide, should never have to use a fertilizer. If the system's working with the biodiversity, we should never have to use an insecticide. If we have proper tilth and pH, calcium is sort of a limiting factor in this, we should never have a disease either. Nature sort of strives towards that on its own. It's us and the weather that's pushing it the other way. Okay, against a cropping and livestock an enterprise scheme. Here's, this to me is the fun part. There are so many options in cropping and livestock management to choose as enterprise. And again, don't take the idea that you have to grow the same thing every year. There are actually crops I enjoy growing more than others, spelt being one of them. I love growing spelt. It's just a beautiful, wonderful crop. It keeps giving, and not just in food for my livestock, and it gives to the soil. It feeds the soil in so many ways. Strong allelopathy, we've talked about this before. You've got to develop and implement a plan against a budget. I'm sorry, but you ultimately got to put that plan against some numbers. You can't just start spending money without having limits and goals. Set your intentions. You got to put that against what your capital and resources are that you can work with. Ultimately, in a sustainable or regenerative whole farm planning system, we have to figure out how to minimize all the inputs into the production system. I'm trying to hold our farm down to nothing more than seed and what I need to bring in to keep the tools and machines and equipment going. I want to optimize, I don't want to maximize exports. Maximize suggests I'm exploiting. I'm sending more off the farm than I should. I'm taking advantage of what Mother Nature is offering me. So I look to optimize the exports so I can generate income, and ideally generate income year-round, all through the seasons. Winter enterprises, for us, that's maple syrup. Livestock's year-round. Eggs, chickens produce eggs year-round. The tree crops, they're very seasonal. Early spring, late spring, summer, late summer, fall, fruit and vegetable crops. Greenhouses to extend our season. The 8-year crop rotation where I'm harvesting and planting throughout the year. I'm not just spreading income, I'm spreading my expenses throughout the year. Cash flow considerations. And then it's a very common thing in our culture. As soon as we have a plan in front of us, it's like, oh man, I need that $40,000 tractor. Well, you know what? You probably don't need it right away. I would tend to think about a utility tractor or some small walk. There's so many beautiful small walk-behind type tractors. Europe has this in spades. When I lived in Germany, we'd float up and down the Rhine, and I was always mesmerized by how they kept their vineyards going up and down the hill. So how the heck did they know that? They walked it with tractors that would walk up the hill. You just had to guide it with it, and they've got more sophisticated than that, but there is so much you can do with a walk-behind tractor, and there's so much you can do with just hand tools. So if you're new at this, consider a handful of enterprises. Start small. Develop the sense of confidence that you can actually grow this crop successfully on a small scale. And if you like growing that crop and it's doing what you think it can, then think about growing. Don't jump in first. Jump in at a level that's affordable and not going to make you broke that first year. The current paradigm in conventional agriculture is that $1 in the hop before you even think about farming. No, we don't need to do that. There are ways to generate income, to move into this slowly. And of course, the whole land acquisition, acquiring land is a huge issue for any farmer. That's a whole other topic in itself. But there are resources out there where retiring farmers are looking to connect new farmers to that land through land contracts and sort of long-term arrangements between multiple owners to find easier ways to get that land in the hands of new farmers. So, prioritize your capital needs over time, bootstrap it, consider a lot of suck up sweat equity up front. And don't get into this mindset. You gotta go big, nimble, dynamic, pay attention, take notes, because guess what? We're gonna have to evaluate it myself. All right. So I just threw this in because this is an interesting. Those of us who've followed in sustainable agriculture for some time, we've had the three three-legged stool, we've had the four-legged stool, and this is the four pillars. And what was interesting about the four speaks to whole farm planning is that it gets beyond the whole profitability only scheme. But it does cover it too, because it says sustainable use. And sustainability does have a profitability part of the equation. So if you actually achieve these things, you are going to meet the profitability, you're going to meet a lot of other things. Sufficient protection of the ecosystem, of the family, of the community, of the land, of the biodiversity, sufficient protection. Maintenance of social relationships, that's again speaks to the community, maintenance of ecological integrity. That's what's driving the whole system. So I just threw that in there for case. So, all right, so here we are, new agricultural paradigm in the face of an ever-changing climate. I'm going to get back on my climate change pulpit again. Combine the same space of land, or synergize. Synergy is a wonderful concept in ecology. The sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And the only reason the greater than sum of its parts or pieces is that they're working together in a synergistic way, creating something that's more than what they were as an individual. And that's true for so many things in life. Communities, relationships, families, always can become more than what we started with as individual pieces. So take this to how we farm. Combine the same space of land with multiple production goals, crops, livestock, and nature. Thinking about it temporarily over time, and don't cop to the idea of monocultures, one planting, one harvest, one check. Get beyond that idea. The future does not bode well for that idea. And then another pitch. Treat all fresh water as if it's gold that needs to be locked up in the ground. So as we break ground and we start scratching the surface of the soil and we start creating these pools and these what they call dead furrows and dead zones because of the way we plow the ground. I mean, I will personally say, even though I'm still a plow person, that the plow is the scourge, one of the greatest scourges of the planet. I am in love with Wes Jackson and his concept that we can produce food without ever putting a plow in the ground. I believe that. So to that end, surface of the soil covered permanently bodes well to regenerating our groundwater and maintaining a very, very precious resource of fresh water, potable water that we have left on this planet. So let's take this a little further. Invasive species obviously are out of place. There's a question there. There are people who actually believe invasives are good for habitat. So there's a balance. So here we're getting to this realm here when you're making decisions and you're making plans, you know, if you do this, it affects this. So you know what? Life is more shades of gray than it is black and white. So we have to make those choices. I am personally one. I used to believe that invasives were so overwhelming that there was no way we were going to get on top of it. But Stratford and our volunteers and the workers that have come through Stratford have proven to me, and the supporters and the donors also, that invasive species can be managed and they should be managed. And it creates opportunities that we didn't fully appreciate existed before. Of course, we already talked about protecting and conserving all water resources. Plant. Trees, shrubs, pollinators, gardens, habitat, seeds. Be a lover of seeds. Keep your soil covered. Keep it alive. Work together with your neighbors, your community. Promote the common good. Enhance wildlife habitat. It promotes appreciation of nature through community, not just the human community, but the community of nature. All right. So here we are. Final step. I'm getting a little overwinded, I think. Monitoring. Let's not forget that we got an important task left in this process. And don't forget that the process continues. We go right back to evaluating our goals, and to reevaluate or assessing the resources, developing a new action plan, and then monitoring again, testing your decisions. So an easy monitoring tool I think we should all be conscious of is sort of paying attention to what you are importing and what you are exporting. Actually write it down. Become very aware of what those are, not just in volume or amounts, but in dollars. And think about what those imports and exports are doing to the land. Are they enhancing your ability to produce? Are they enhancing the ecology of the system? Are they enhancing the biodiversity? Are they enhancing your ability to create income stream throughout the year? And then the exports too. Are you exporting too much? Are you exporting nutrients? Hay is a very rich commodity right now because of the uncertainty in the weather. I saw a bale of hay last year that went for $56 a bale, a regular square bale of alfalfa, $56 for that one bale. So think about it. Is it worth $56, or is it better to be kept on the farm and feed that sheep or goat you got yourself? So input costs, land infrastructure become the most a farmer must be successful with. So I picked this off the internet, and what's interesting is what made me laugh. 6 easy steps. You know what? None of this is easy. But it can be more rewarding and fun than we tend to make it. So let's just start with the idea that we need to understand our soils better. That goes back to that assessment thing. We need to get those geological surveys out. We need to look at them. We need to do the soil test. We need to check that background test. We need to do these things to understand the kind of ground we're farming. So testing regularly. Adopting soil-specific nutrient management guidelines. There's a mouthful. But you know what? Organic matter is going to help do that for you. Don't think about micronutrients unless you have a truly defined, tested deficiency in your soil. You can spend gobs of money on buying these micronutrients to fix a boron problem or a selenium problem. Guess what? All of our soils have a lot of problems. You're not going to fix them all. Organic matter in nature is really the only tool that's really going to help you keep it moving in the right direction. So it's not easy, but if we plug into nature and use nature and what she does or he does or Gaia does on a regular basis, she'll take care of things for you. And we're going to be more on the way than we're helpful. So nutrient monitoring is important. It's a very powerful tool, but think of your nutrients as coming through your. So all right, we'll end it here. The 4 steps, the mantra. Don't forget, remember the mantra. Goal sets, set your intentions, inventory and assessment. Develop and implement an action plan. Monitor, test your decisions. Start over. It's like Groundhog Day. All righty, so that's what we got. So we're open for questions.
All right, everybody. So that is, whole farm planning. Like we said, it's kind of a big topic. It can be difficult to summarize, but I feel like we did a pretty good job. Some things that kind of stuck out to me were some of my own experiences growing up on a farm. And I also have some questions for you, too, once I kind of talk about that a little bit. But, as we're chatting, feel free to throw in questions. If you haven't yet, please like our video, subscribe. We've got a few minutes left, so we'll talk about what we're going to talk about. So like Jeff said, the family part of, planning a farm is really important. Kind of my dad's initial goal when we had moved to a farm was to expose my brother and I to agriculture because he had grown up on a farm himself and eventually had to move away when he got older, and he had really missed that and wanted us to have that same experience. And I know there were some, like feuding with my parents a little bit, just kind of like, oh, we're going to be in a rural area that, you're not going to have the best resources for schools. But I think about some of the positive youth development that I've had with FFA, 4-H. Think about if you have kids and kind of the opportunities that they have if they can grow up on a farm, have those experiences, and then develop as leaders with agriculture as kind of the medium for that leadership development, I think is pretty important. So now I'm going to kind of ask you a few questions. So I know you said this is kind of like a really big, almost another topic, but how to acquire land. Anybody I talk to that's interested in getting into agriculture, especially I find people like my age that are thinking about it, they look at finding land as this overwhelming task. So there's like a few different ways I've heard people talk about what kind of are your recommendations for finding land and then like turning it into something.
Well, I mean, here's the problem with buying land, is that you have to have time in terms of how, wherever you live, where you choose to buy land, relates to metropolitan or non-metropolitan areas, because that relationship is going to sort of drive your enterprise selection. So that to me is a major why in the road right there. It's like, all right, I want to just be in the middle of nowhere, and I'm going to ship my sheep 2 hours away, and that's where the cheaper land is. But there are great opportunities for choosing land closer. It's more expensive, obviously, but neither scenario is easy. And to the point where the land that's cheapest is not going to be in the state you're living in. So that's sort of giving you the option of leaving the area. So I always like to start with the idea that you have friends and family members who have similar goals as you. And the idea that you would jointly purchase land together. That can get messy. So the other types of things that are out there right now is things like land banks. There's organizations that like Land Link that do nothing but connect retiring farmers with new farmers. The land contract situation is a very sort of land, but your rent accumulates over time, so you're paying for it slowly, like a 30-year mortgage, but you're not necessarily paying high interest rates. You're not losing equity as you rent, kind of thing. I sort of like that idea. It can be a bad situation for the landowner, if the land contract falls through, because he's looking to hand the land over, so he's basically has to start over with someone, and it's obviously a total loss for someone who paid quote unquote rent for that many years thinking it would be applied. Right. If you're interested in metropolitan areas, there's an incredible amount of unused, totally empty properties, lots within cities that are very easy to acquire. The only downside to that is you've got to know the history. It could be a foundry that smelted lead, before you came there, or it was a dump site for lead paint, or whatever. You can build around that and go to a totally constructed bed, and you bring in soil and create barriers around any concerns like that. A lot of city managers are very happy to lease that at a very reasonable, even like $1 a year kind of rate, just to have somebody maintain it. But keep in mind that if you don't maintain it, they're going to say go. Yeah. They have that power. So there's an opportunity to get your feet wet in it without making that capital investment up front with these empty lots that are all over in every city.
For sure. Yeah, all of those things are all like things that I've heard of before. Wyatt Run Farms, I think, is a cool example of like people going into. They have, I think it's almost like 300 acres and a few different groups that live there, all like separately, but they are to maintain the farm, which is pretty neat. And I remember hearing from Ross about like kind of the land exchange and really just like connecting like retiring farmers with new farmers, which is a really big topic there. So
there's also an opportunity to actually learn how to farm with someone like that.
Yeah.
Where you have developed a long-term relationship with the idea that he will eventually turn it over or something.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's wonderful because you actually learn how to farm on that piece of land. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're about out of time. I had a few more questions, but we'll go ahead and wrap up. So whole farm planning, we talked a lot about like setting goals. One thing that stuck out to me is SMART goals, which is kind of like an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. So that's something that was always kind of like drilled into me when setting goals, and it's something that I've utilized a lot. Jeff mentioned, writing down your goals. I think there's some like saying that if you write down your goals, you're like 80% more likely to see it happen. And so definitely setting goals, being realistic, and time bound. I think that's probably one of the most important things. You can set goals, write them down, whatever, but if you don't like set a time for them, it's going to be pushed to tomorrow, and then tomorrow never comes because then it's today. Definitely keep all of those things in mind. I think this is probably one of the more important like topics to focus on when farm planning, and just like connecting all of the different ideas that we've talked about throughout this series, and we'll continue to talk about with those specific ideas, but then bringing them all together with what we talked about today. So thank you for tuning in. If you tuned in live, if you're watching, kind of our replay, thank you for watching. We really appreciate all of your support. Like I said earlier, please like and subscribe to our channel and to this video. And hopefully you'll tune in this Thursday for renewable energy, and then through the rest of the series up until August. So thank you for today.